the leadership at both churches would be in communication with each other to like take notes of whether or not I was attending services.
Wow.
So I had to start saying like I was attending at a different church. I was visiting around, which was a little more frowned on. But it meant that I never actually signed any membership forms, which I'm really grateful for, because I've had friends who have signed those forms and then ended up in church discipline for years after they left.
What does that mean? 100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. All right. Well, Jerri, thank you so much for talking to me. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. I know we've been working on getting you on here for probably like a month at this point. And I'm just so stoked that you reached out and you reached out to me through the application form. And I'm really excited for the audience to get to hear your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. A friend of mine was on here and they said their experience was really amazing and healing.
Oh, good. Oh, that's awesome. That is so cool. So today we are going to talk specifically about the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches.
Yes.
And so why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, yourself, anything interesting you want to include, and then about what that church or group is like.
Yeah. So I am the oldest of 6. My youngest sibling was born when I was 16. So I have been around young kids and kind of provided or taken on like a caregiver role most of my life at this point. I have been working on kind of finding my way like as a professional, given that a lot of my professional growth was pretty stunted. Primarily thanks to a lot of those teachings from the church.
Right.
But I've been, especially over the last couple of years, I've had a lot of really great experiences. I feel like I'm really finding myself. So yeah, I think that's kind of most of what's about me.
Yeah. And you brought up something really important that I don't think I've ever talked to a guest about in my memory, the lack of professional development from people in these churches and in these religious groups that are evangelical and fundamentalist. Even if you get out and even if you start your life somewhere else, it's so important in the church that you don't develop any professional skills. And a lot of people don't talk about that, or they don't think about that angle. So what was that like for you, first of all, getting involved in the church to begin with, and then kind of your development through your teenage years?
Yeah, for sure. So my family kind of bounced around like mostly charismatic, non-denominational churches until I was about 11. And then they started leaning Reformed, mostly Reformed Presbyterian, ended up in like a home church that they kind of helped plant.
Interesting.
With just a handful of other families. And in that home church, they started following a lot of the works of like prominent Reformed pastors.
Right.
And one of those was Doug Wilson. And he is the founder of the CREC. And we ended up moving to a different state when I was 13 and ended up in an actual church plant of the CREC. It kind of hit me at like the unfortunately perfect developmental stage where I just soaked up everything from that denomination.
Right.
I've always been a really big reader. I tend to dive into a topic wholeheartedly and just take it and run with it.
Right.
And so that's exactly what I did with a lot of that theology. And I was in that church until I was 19, at which point I moved up to Idaho. and started attending the college that was founded by the CREC and is almost 100% staffed by CREC.
Wow.
Mostly pastors. Some of them are like just doctors, but they're usually like elders in one of the CREC churches.
Yeah. What do you think it was about CREC that attracted your parents to go from non-denominational to something very like fundamentalist? What do you think it was?
I think some of it was kind of that emphasis on gender roles. And as well as like the promotion of having large families, of having kids, and not really taking a lot of steps to prevent conception. And that, like, having a big family, having lots of kids was always a huge thing for my mom, especially. I think my dad was actually a little bit more hesitant to follow that. And I think a lot of that is because, like, it's financially, it's a burden
Yeah,
to have that
it's a
many
lot.
kids. And he ended up really overworking himself to be able to provide for our family.
Wow.
I remember he would leave the house at 4 and he wouldn't get back till like 6 or 7.
Wow.
And so really almost all of his time and energy was spent at work. But that kind of meant it also fell really well into that gender role expectation of he wasn't really expected to contribute a lot at home.
Right.
The child rearing was mostly from my mom, and he would like be called in to discipline and stuff
Right.
like that.
Right.
And so, like, to this day, I'm surprised that my relationship with my dad was so positive while I was living at home.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just kind of that structure, that rigidity of thinking, was just really appealing because it kind of takes the work out of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah.
like if you already know what to expect from a family situation, you kind of bypass a lot of those conversations that really should happen
Yeah.
between a couple, of like what your priorities are and how you want to structure your family and stuff, and what works well too, what
Right.
you're physically capable of. Kind of all of that is swept under the rug, and you follow the same pattern that everybody else does.
Interesting. And so was that future appealing to you as well when you were, 18, 19? Like, was that something that you thought you wanted, or were you just doing it because you had to?
I think honestly it was kind of a mix of both. I believed really wholeheartedly in like a lot of these I guess tenets of the religion.
Right.
I really wholeheartedly believe that it was good and right and ethical for me to like pursue an early marriage and basically just start having kids as soon as possible and not stop.
Wow.
And especially like just I was raised and socialized as a woman, and so there were a lot of things that I believed, but definitely hit me pretty hard. And they were a lot harder for me to really, I guess, jump in wholeheartedly. A lot of it being that like I really enjoy research, I really enjoy studying, and I just kind of always had questions. I was always looking to really help my faith mature from my perspective at the time.
Yeah.
And it really rubbed me the wrong way when like I would try to get involved in theological discussions and would kind of be shut down or just straight up ignored.
Right.
And that always rankled me because I was like, how is it that it's such a good thing for men to get really involved in theology and really involved in church leadership? But even if I'm sitting here and like I've probably read more than this person that's talking to me, I've spent more time with it.
Yeah.
But my opinion was not wanted and was not valid from their perspective.
Yeah. And I was really surprised to hear that you were basically allowed to go to college. Like, I know that even though the school was kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say sponsored by, but like founded by the church, basically.
Totally.
I was surprised to hear that. Do you feel like, one, was it accredited? And then two, do you feel like what you were studying there was like actual studies, or was it more of like an MRS degree situation?
Yeah, it's not accredited. Well, technically it is accredited, but it's through a program that the church founded to say that it's accredited.
Right. Yeah.
So not really.
It's
Not
accredited in the best way that they could possibly get it accredited.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I was in kind of a weird position because my last year in high school, I was actually in an arranged courtship.
Wow.
And so it kind of looked like I wasn't going to go to college at all. Like if all things went according to plans, like I would graduate from high school and immediately get married.
And were you
And
okay with that, like the arrangement and stuff, like, or was it more like a duty thing?
it was really mixed. A lot of it was hard for me to kind of suss out because we weren't allowed to talk one-on-one for the first 8 months of the courtship.
Wow.
We were only allowed to hang out and spend time if we each had a sibling present, or
Interesting.
if like our whole families were hanging out. And so like I didn't really know this person. They were there, and we had a casual acquaintance.
Wow.
But I didn't really know them, and so I liked the idea of kind of skipping the hard part of like finding a spouse, because I
Yeah.
knew that was what was expected,
Yeah.
and definitely something I wanted at the time.
Yeah.
And this kind of bypassed any of the difficulties. But at the same time, like I really didn't know if I was going to enjoy being with this person.
Right? You have no idea who they are.
Yeah, and
Like,
really all I knew was like what his hobbies were, and what his sense of humor was, sort of.
and what church he went to.
Exactly.
Like,
And that was kind of it.
yeah.
And so what ended up happening was we were finally allowed to text each other. But with
Wow.
the this was 8 months into trying to get to know this person. But the rule was our parents had constant access to our text history. So like really we kind of talked about the weather and movies that we'd seen. That was kind of it.
Yeah.
So it still felt pretty shallow to me.
Yeah.
And he ended up breaking it off.
Wow. Oh, he did.
He did. He asked my dad to meet him at like a little coffee shop or something, and shared that he this wasn't what he wanted. And I remember that like hit my dad so hard. He came home and just started crying and like apologized to me, because from his perspective he had failed at the like arranged courtship thing.
Did he say like what reasons exactly it wasn't for that a kid, like for that kid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
Like,
child, like
yeah.
Yeah, this guy didn't really give any reason. He just kind of said, "I'm sorry, but I'm done."
Sounds like a teenage breakup. Like,
Totally.
no
Yeah.
real reason, just
There's no real
not
reason.
feeling it. Yeah.
And I heard from other people who went to that the same church that he did, because he actually lived several hours away, which just like compounds the whole, like we would see each other once a month.
Right.
And apparently he had like met up with an ex, because he had previously just done like normal dating.
Right.
And he like met up with an ex, and the next day asked to meet my dad.
Oh.
And apparently they like got back together and stuff, and I was like honestly really happy for him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cute.
And like I cried for 20 minutes and then was kind of over it, and I was fine.
Yeah.
So it definitely like it impacted my dad way more than it did
That's
me.
so interesting. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. Was he from like a prominent family? Like, was that the deal? Or
complicated. He actually wasn't a CREC member. He went to a church that highly regarded the CREC and took a lot of inspiration from them, but they were actually Reformed Baptist.
Interesting.
He lived on a compound with the other church members.
Okay.
And there was like 5 families that all lived on this property that belonged to the church. And so basically by default, like all of all of the men were kind of part of church leadership.
Yeah.
And he had a brother who was married to one of the like head pastor's daughters. So like they were sort of celebrities.
He was like
in the
royalty
little
kind of.
compound.
Yeah.
And so I think that was very very attractive to my family in particular. And kind of the biggest reason I was interested in it was that my best friend was married to the pastor's son.
Got it.
And they lived on the property as well. And so I was like, oh, I'll get to like see my best friend every day and all of that. But yeah, I think a lot of it was just that we happened to be in the same circles because of my friend.
Yeah.
And I think they just liked the idea of being able to like sign all the paperwork and send me off to my new life like right out of
Wow. Interesting. So that breakup happens. So then you decide you're going to go to college.
Yes, like the next month I decided I want to go to college, and the pastor at the CREC church that I was going to, he had just sent one of his daughters up there, and she met her husband, and
perfect.
Yeah, she didn't finish her degree, and they got married, and now they have like 4 or 5 kids or whatever.
Wow.
But that was like seen as, if you're not going to marry somebody in our church, you go up there and marry somebody up there, because then you don't have to worry about like theological differences. You just know you're going to get along.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about making a personal decision for yourself. You can just do it the way we want you to do it. Yep.
Exactly.
That's wild.
So yeah, that was really kind of the only reason I ended up over there, is because that was seen as like the right choice if I was going to go to college.
Yeah.
But it was kind of with the expectation that I would meet somebody and not finish my degree.
Yeah.
Which is what happened.
Yeah. Oh, and so was it like a typical college experience with like dorms and stuff, or did you still live at home?
So I lived like 2,000 miles away. And what that particular college encourages is that if your family isn't local and you can't live with your family, that you rent out space from other church members, so that you're kind of always pretty insulated and staying within the same circles.
Yeah.
So they don't have dorms. When I was there, they had one building. They actually had like one quarter of one building. Since then, they have taken over the rest of the building, and they've also purchased additional property down the street. But like when I was there, my class had under 40 students, and each class kind of progressively got smaller because people would either get married or just drop out.
Yep.
So it's very, very small. And yeah, everybody is kind of expected to live with church members or rent out space with other NSA students. So you just kind of stay within the community. Yeah.
Interesting. And so did you have a good time there, like at the time, or was it like, what was that like at the time versus reflecting on it now?
Yeah. I mean, at the time for me, it was a really good opportunity to kind of dive into a lot of the theological stuff that I was interested in.
Yeah, like the study aspect.
Right. And I loved that here in this space, at least, both men and women students could like pretty equally contribute to classrooms. Like you were expected to answer questions regularly, regardless of your gender. And so that was really nice. It felt really validating to get to interact on that level.
Yeah.
At the time, I had what I would describe as a really good close circle of friends. Looking back, it was pretty toxic.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah. When I first got there, like before classes even started, one of the pastor's daughters like kind of adopted me.
Yeah.
and so she was one of the people I would consider my closest friends while I was at the school. But it meant I kind of always had this voice in my circles of like, be careful not to speak up too much. You don't want to come across as pushy and
Right.
just constant critiquing. That at the time I felt like, oh, I love that she cares about me and wants me to be successful and all of that.
Right. Right. And do you think from her it came from a good place at the time? Like, do you think she thought she was actually doing something good, or do you think it was just mean girl toxicity?
I think she wholeheartedly thought she was doing what was good.
Yeah.
I think she saw me, and like even at the beginning I kind of stood out. I've always had a little bit of a rebellious streak, and so I would like wear skirts that were like just a little bit shorter than anybody else's.
Showing them ankles all over campus.
and like I would also choose to wear pants, which was less common, especially because freshmen are not allowed to wear jeans.
Wow.
You are required to dress business casual for everything that you do within the classes and stuff. And they, from their perspective, like the excuse that they give is they want to prepare us to interact in the professional world. So we need
ironic, given what we talked about. Ironic indeed.
Yes. But yeah, so I think she saw me show up in my tank tops and my shorter skirts and just thought, you know, oh, this poor misguided person, just
this lost lamb.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I think she meant well from her perspective.
Yeah. So then you met somebody, and yes. Were they also a little bit rebellious? Were they more conservative? Like, how did that go?
They were definitely a little more rebellious, but like closeted rebellious, like
right, like rebellious in a fundamentalist Christian sort of way.
Exactly. Like he had actually gotten in trouble multiple times for like secretly dating people. And so, you know, shocker, we were flirting within the first several months. And yeah, we kind of connected on like we both had interests that were outside of like the expected, you know, oh, I love reading. I volunteer with the church. Like that's kind of the expected hobbies that people have. And we were both like, we enjoy gaming. We enjoy, you know, playing volleyball and shit like that. So, oh, sorry. I don't know.
Oh, okay. That's totally fine. Yeah. I didn't even realize until you did that. Yeah, fuck it. So then, so when you were at school and you started dating people, did you have to like report it? Were you like, did you have to like file with some clerk that you were dating, or how did that go?
Yeah. So it was never called dating. You were not allowed to date. You were allowed to court.
Court for marriage.
Courting inherently involves both sets of parents. And like frequently also involves the pastors or elders or whatever. So yeah, we weren't really supposed to do the dating thing. There wasn't really a place to report it, but like it would never be a secret. It would never be a question. It was, yes, I have started courting this person now.
Wow.
Yeah. And then actually the year after I left, they instituted a new rule that freshmen were not allowed to court. You had to wait until you were a sophomore.
Man, I'm not even allowed to wear jeans. I'm not allowed to like, I'm not allowed to like spit any game on campus. I'm not allowed to shoot my shot. Jeez.
Yep.
That's wild. All the while dressing business professional every day.
Yep.
That's crazy. So then did you guys get married while you're at school, after school? What made you decide like to take that leap as opposed to just courting?
Yeah, so we were kind of secretly seeing each other for like the last half of our freshman year. We were in the same class. His parents found out and like made him break up with me, but we would still like secretly talk on different apps.
Why do parents think that works? Why did they?
I know.
Like y'all secretly dated for like months. Why did they think you weren't just going to do that again?
Totally. So of course we kept talking, and
Yeah.
I went home for the summer, and we talked like the entire time I was gone. When I got back to school, we kind of continued seeing each other. But about halfway through my fall semester, my parents actually left the CREC, because they
Wow.
had disagreements with the pastor at their local the local church plant.
Interesting.
And that ended up, the pastor down there emailed the pastors, the head pastors of the two sister churches up here, um, and basically said I was no longer a member in good standing. Which, because
What?
I don't have my own membership, I am only considered a member through my dad.
Wow.
And so, in order to actually attend this school, you have to sign paperwork that you are a member in good standing of a church. It doesn't have to be a CREC church, but it has to be a church, and you have to attend a church weekly. If you don't, you will be brought in to see the school leadership and or the local church leadership.
Wow. So that guy was really like, fuck all y'all, like
Yeah,
getting you
pretty
kicked out of school.
much.
Wow. And that guy's a
Yeah.
pastor. He's
Yep.
a pastor.
Yep.
Jeez.
So yeah, so when that happened, I ended up being pulled into one of the pastor's offices, and it was really interesting because they do this thing where, as long as the father is a member of the church or one of the churches, their teaching is you do what your dad says, regardless of the circumstances. If your dad has said to do it, you are expected to do it.
Wow.
But if your dad stops attending one of the churches, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, it's really hard to have, a father who is so misguided and misled. But we're here for you, so you can stay here with us and we'll take care of
Wow. Like
you.
we are
Yeah,
your dad now.
basically, yeah. And so I had managed to skate by without actually attending any of the churches, because I would tell my roommates that I was going to go attend the other, like visit the other church that week, and then I'd just stay home after they left. And they'd always like offer rides to get to the church or whatever. I'm like, oh no, I enjoy walking, it's fine. um so when the pastor pulled me in, he was like, so which church do you want to sign membership forms for? And I was like, I need more time to like figure out what works well for me. And he was like, okay, but you know you you need to make sure you do it soon. Um and after that, then like the leadership at both churches would be in communication with each other to like take notes of whether or not I was attending services. So I
Wow.
had to start saying like I was attending at a different church. I was visiting around, which was a little more frowned on. But it meant that I never actually signed any membership forms, which I'm really grateful for, because I've had friends who have signed those forms and then ended up in church discipline for years after they left.
What does that mean?
It means you'll have church leadership checking up on you regularly. They will refuse to end your membership unless you start attending a new church, at which point you can transfer your membership
Do you
to
have to
a different.
pay membership dues?
No, but kind of, you'll be judged for not like
Yeah.
tithing regularly. Um, and they'll basically just kind of keep hounding you and asking you to like come in for counseling and shit until you join another church. And
Wow.
even then, like if you try to start attending a church that like isn't approved by them, they just won't release your forms. I had a friend who went through that for years and finally just had their new pastor email the CREC pastor and be like, hey, we've got it. It's good. You don't have to keep checking up on this person.
Wow.
Uh, and that was the only way that she could get them to stop hounding her.
Jeez, that's wild.
Yeah.
That's so then did you get to finish out at school, or like what did you decide to do after that when they were like pressuring you to pick one?
Yeah, so my family was really pissed about the church overall, and so they said they would stop paying for me to attend at that school. So
Gee.
I basically just stopped at fall break and said, "Hey, I'm unenrolling from everything. I'm not going to attend here anymore."
Wow.
Um
That's so sad.
yeah, it meant that I basically wasted a year and a half in a school that I ended up transferring to another school later on,
That's good.
and was surprised that I was allowed to transfer my credits.
Yeah.
But this particular school works a lot with students who leave NSA. And so they have developed kind of a list of the classes that they'll accept credit for, and then a list of the classes that they won't accept credit
Got
for.
it. And so what did that mean for your relationship when you left that school?
Um, he was also really mad about the school, and about the leadership, because like he'd been called into counseling like
Yeah.
frequently because of all
Yeah.
of his deviant behavior. Um, and so he was already kind of over the drama. But he ended up staying and finishing his associates.
Wow.
So he was still attending for a little while, and he and I continued to secretly see each other until like the last couple of months of his sophomore year. And then he like officially asked for permission to court me. And so we were considered, in a legal relationship at that point. Um, Although before we started courting, his parents found out about us being together again, and they signed me up for counseling with the pastor's wife. And it kind of like it wasn't optional; like I was expected to go. Um, so I went, and she spoke with me for 30 minutes, and I kind of shared mostly about like the my family situation, the arranged courtship I had been in, that kind of thing. And she ended up reporting back to his parents and said that they shouldn't take me seriously because this was just a rebound relationship. So they
What?
shouldn't worry too much about it. But she literally shared everything that I had said in counseling with his parents. Which then through them ended up being shared with like the entire church leadership board of both of the churches. And so I had
Wow.
just so many old men who knew everything that I had shared in that session.
Wow.
It was really violating. I was pretty pissed.
Yeah, like you didn't know going in that she was gonna share anything that you said?
No, I had no idea. I kind
Like,
of expected like I had never been to therapy, but I had a handful of friends at that point who
yeah,
who did go. And so I knew like the expectation is, this is confidential. It's not supposed to be shared
yeah.
with anyone.
Wow.
Yeah, so
And
that was
so
a shocker.
right, and, like, how did you guys last through all that? Because that's, like, I would've just been so mortified, I would've just ended the relationship.
Yeah, we we broke up and got back together like every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And so we had been back and forth throughout the whole process.
That's
But then once we
wild.
were like officially courting, it was kind of like the shame of breaking that off would have been more than the frustration of staying together.
Yeah.
So
Wow,
yeah,
and is that why you guys got married, or did you, like, legitimately also really wanna get married?
I mean, I think it's really hard to say. I was
Yeah.
so young. I had like
Yeah.
I was only 20 when we first started like officially courting.
Wow.
Um and what ended up happening was he got really frustrated with kind of the local scene, because everyone here would literally stare as we walked down the street. We
It's
weren't allowed to hold
ridiculous.
hands in public.
That's utterly ridiculous.
Yeah. So, like if we were ever seen somewhere that he hadn't reported to his parents, that person would go and let the parents know, like, hey, we saw your son over here with his
We saw your
courting
full grown
partner.
ass adult son with a full grown ass adult woman in
Yep,
a relationship out enjoying themselves. Do something.
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
wild.
So we both got frustrated up here, and we ended up moving in with my parents, because my parents actually lived on a decent amount of property and had like they had a barn in the yard with with an apartment on one side that had actually been my apartment my last year of high school.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was actually really cool. That's probably like the best thing my parents ever did.
Yeah.
So when we moved over there, he was allowed to live in the apartment rent free, and I was allowed to share a room with my sister.
Got it.
So we spent that summer after he got his associates. We spent that summer with my family, and my family is incredibly toxic, particularly my mother. And we both got so tired of dealing with both of our parents' shit that we were like, we need to be independent. We need to be anywhere but here.
Yeah.
And we ended up moving back to Idaho, but because he had a potential job lined up, and also he wanted to pursue an actual degree.
Right.
And it would be like he's still counted as an Idaho resident, and so it would be pretty cheap for him to attend up here. And so we were given two options. We could either get married immediately and move up together, or we could get married in like over Christmas, but we would not be allowed to live together.
Jeez, all these rules being made by people. It's wild.
Yeah, and so we ended up like, I didn't want to move up there and pay rent for two different locations, and he was like, I am not living with my family again.
Right.
And so we were like, well, financially, it makes the most sense for us to just go ahead and get married. So we were engaged for a month and got married, and then moved back up to Idaho together.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and it was definitely like, at that point, I was 21. And I felt old to be getting married so late.
You were a spinster in the church, man.
I really was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like dangerously close to it.
Like osteoporosis and everything. Like,
yeah.
So
yeah.
And then now if you don't mind me saying, you're not married anymore.
No, we are not married anymore.
And was that because of religious differences? Just got married too fast, like growing apart?
Yeah, I mean, definitely got married too fast. 100%. A lot of it was when we had moved back up, we were already pretty tired of the church. But his family was a pretty prominent family within the church. And so we kind of visited a couple of times, and just always felt like just overwhelming waves of shame because everyone would stare at us and our friends wouldn't hang out with us anymore.
Just because you had courted without asking permission?
Yep, because we had courted without asking for permission, and we'd gotten married kind of somewhat against the will of like his parents.
Wow.
So,
and I'm sure it was the majority your fault, I'm sure. Probably.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, his mom called me a bimbo.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was totally fine until he met you.
Yep, 100%. So yeah, we were kind of just tired of it, and ended up not attending anymore. We told his family that we were attending a different church, but we weren't. And we found ourselves pretty quickly moving away from a lot of that theology. We ended up somewhat diverging in our paths, but we were both definitely away from the CREC.
Right. You were both like deconstructing just differently.
Exactly. Yeah. And when I got pregnant with our kiddo, I got really scared because we didn't have any support here.
Right.
I didn't have people who could help me. And so we ended up starting to attend a different non-denominational church in the area because I really wanted to build community, and I didn't know how to do that.
Right.
And that church's theology really spoke to me, and like it still, I look back on what I learned there pretty fondly,
Yeah.
because it was a really good step for me on my way to kind of leaving religion altogether.
Yeah.
But for him, it actually ended up being a pretty triggering process,
Oh,
because that church was kind of everything we'd been warned to avoid growing up.
right. Right.
And like his family was very derisive when they learned that we started attending there, and like we would try to talk about sermons, and like, because at this point we were having dinner with his family every Sunday.
Wow.
um yeah, which I literally had panic attacks every week.
I'm gonna say, like, I'm surprised that was not like going to jail every
It
Sunday.
was, it
Like,
totally was.
yeah.
Once I was pregnant, then I at least had the excuse of like, oh, pregnancy fatigue, I'm gonna go
Yeah.
lay down and sleep. And that was, at that point I was then carrying their grandchild, so they were a lot more willing to work with me on things.
Interesting how that works.
Yeah. So that process ended up, I mean, we would just be in arguments, particularly with his dad and mom, every week. uh and that really wore him down.
Of course, yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, and we eventually got to the point where I was like, "Hey, I don't think like queerness is a sin. I actually think it's like a healthy, loving thing." And when I told him that, he told me he wanted a divorce. And this was after I'd had my kiddo. Um, but he kind of spiraled and like freaked out about it. Um, and ended up changing his mind like a week later. But that kind of set the pattern of
Yeah,
like,
like when somebody says that, you can't just take it back.
right, that's not a thing that just gets, scrubbed over.
Right.
And so that, like, it became this thing where I was continuing to deconstruct, and he kind of started backpedaling on a lot of things. And we would just kind of fight and argue every week over a sermon. And he finally just stopped attending with me. Um, and I ended up even more involved with the church. I was volunteering for their children's ministry. I ended up being hired as their receptionist.
That's cool.
And when I worked for them, I started realizing, like, the pastor that, like, the head pastor that had been there for this whole time, he moved. He went to a different church. And they had a speaker that would frequently come in, who was incredibly influential. He was Jewish.
Hmm,
And
interesting.
and so he would teach, like, the traditional Jewish perspective on the Old Testament,
Huh.
and talk about how that influences modern, or should influence modern Christian perspectives on the New Testament. And
That's interesting.
it was so healing for me.
Yeah.
But when I started working for the church, we were supposed to go to like a staff retreat. And we were supposed to come prepared to share our testimony. And I agonized over that, because I was like, I'm not willing to pretend that I'm not queer in this instance. It's not something that I
Oh,
feel like I need to bring up all the
so
time.
you, like, knew
But
that about yourself at that point?
yes, I had known that I was bisexual since high school.
Interesting.
Uh and by the time I was like just a couple years after getting married, I'd realized I was genderqueer.
Mhm. And
Um
is that what kinda sent him over the edge, was
oh yeah,
that
that was
you were? Yeah.
yep. He had actually known that I was bisexual since we were dating. But he was like, as long as you don't act on it, it's fine.
As long as we just pretend it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And once I started kind of pushing back on that, then that was just kind of that sent him into a spiral. Um, but yeah, so I ended up actually meeting with that one teacher, one on one, and was like, "Hey, I'm queer and I don't know what to do.
Right.
Um, I don't know how to interact with the staff now. They're starting to get more and more conservative. And I'm sitting here on the outside with my pink hair, and
Yeah.
like, I don't
Yeah.
know what to do." And he gave me absolutely incredible advice, that just it influenced me so much. And he basically just encouraged me that, like, because he would frequently say in sermons, because he'd come in and give sermons occasionally, he'd say that, like, the best spiritual growth is experienced by being in intentional community with people you disagree with. About always having an open mind to understand that, like, this person who comes from a completely different background and spiritual belief system, they can probably teach you more than somebody who agrees with you.
Interesting.
And so I, like, took that to heart.
Yeah.
And when we sat down and had breakfast, he was like, that doesn't apply to people who are hurting you. You are,
yeah.
That was revolutionary.
This man works in a church?
I know. And so he was like, you are not, if you feel safe, then sure, keep doing what you're trying to do. Keep trying to influence people and share your story. But, like, if you don't feel safe to do that, there is no shame in choosing to back off from those relationships.
Right.
That's actually a healthy thing for you to do.
Yeah.
And that just completely blew my mind. And I decided at the time to go to this staff retreat, and I did share my queerness. I shared that. I shared.
Damn, that's brave. Like, people who've never been involved in, like, a fundamentalist church or, like, religion in general, they don't understand, like, it's not the same as sharing it with coworkers or classmates. It is like, you're in danger.
Yeah, totally. And I shared, like, my history of mental illness. I shared my background of child sexual assault. And I just kind of laid everything bare, and I was like, I don't actually know what I believe now. I know what speaks to me, and I know what I connect with, but I don't believe anything wholeheartedly anymore.
Yeah. I bet that went down like a bag of bricks.
It was really fascinating to me, because when we came back from the retreat, the vast majority of the male staff kind of stopped interacting with me. And, like, I'm sitting here scheduling their appointments, and they, like, kind of only interacted via writing and kind of stopped, like, asking how I was doing and asking if there was things to pray for me. The vast majority of the female staff were still interacting. If anything, they were interacting more. They were really encouraging and loving. But yeah, most of there were 2 male staff members who still were very kind and almost more intentionally in community with me. But I ended up, a month later, I went to an event that previous teacher was throwing in another city. And when I got there, it turned out his entire speaking event was talking about this book called The Great Spiritual Migration. I think it's by Brian McLaren. And it's basically talking about how young people are leaving the church in droves.
Yeah.
And this book was talking about how that's a good thing. It's good to see our religion continuing to move forward and develop. And
who is this person? This mythical being? Is this Jesus actually coming back and setting the record straight? Like, is that who this is?
Like, it was incredible. And at that point, I was at a place where I was hurting every day at work, because I felt like I was now being treated differently because I was queer and because I was mentally ill and all of these things.
And was your, like, getting divorced, was that also, like, a big scarlet letter too? Or did anybody know about that?
I hadn't gotten divorced yet. I was still married to a man that I wholeheartedly disagreed with for actually multiple years after that.
Wow.
And I do think a lot of that is, like, the social pressure to stay married, to work it out, to marriage is hard.
Right.
Spoiler, that's bad. If your marriage is that hard, that's actually that's a red flag.
Like, I figured I knew you hadn't legally divorced yet, but I just assumed he had, like, moved out or something.
We ended up not separating until actually last year.
Wow.
And that's, like, 3 years after I left the church.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, I ended up at that event. I spoke one-on-one with this teacher, and I just broke down crying, and I was like, I want to be a voice for change, but I feel like I'm being silenced. And he was incredibly validating and supportive, and he's like, that this isn't actually a safe place for people in your position. And if you feel safe to continue trying, go for it. But like, honestly, no, it sounds like you'd be healthier, and your spiritual life would be healthier if you just left. Um,
Wow.
and like, that's what I needed to hear. I needed that,
Yes,
like,
that
kind of
permission.
approval. Yeah, yeah. To be able to really walk away. And so I got back home that weekend and put in my 2 weeks notice. Um, and even then, I like didn't feel safe to say why. I kind of just said like, oh, I want to go back to school, which was true. And I was like, so I need to find a part-time job, which was also true. Um, and then said like, y'all have been so amazing and supportive, and I'm so happy I've been here. And that was less true.
That's
um
funny.
yeah, but yeah, I ended up
Wow.
leaving, and like, all of the people who had been supportive were really sad to see me go. But a couple of them kind of knew that, like, oh yeah, this was very much driven by my lack of feeling included.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
So you put in your 2 weeks notice, and fast forward to now,
mhm.
you're divorced, you're polyamorous,
Yep.
and living your best life. Like, how did we get there? That's amazing.
It took so much effort, honestly. It took me being willing to let go of kind of everyone and everything that I thought was important to me, um to be able to really dive into like who I am and what feels good to me. And after I left the church, I actually came out publicly, on social media. And from then on, I kind of made it a point to intentionally share my story,
Yeah.
and just be really open with everything about me, because that became more important to me than like trying to preserve relationships at that point.
Right. Right. Why would you want to preserve a relationship with somebody who only likes you if you're fake? Like, what's the
Exactly.
point? How is that even a relationship? It's not.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, how did
And
you
oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I before I even started working for the church, I'd actually completely cut contact with my bio fam. And
Wow.
I consider that a huge step in my healing. Like, I
That's
I was
huge.
yeah, I was unable to move forward and live authentically while I still felt that pressure from my family to fit in. Because even if they left the church, they still believed wholeheartedly in a lot of the theological tenets.
Yeah. And when you went no contact, did you tell them, or did you just go no contact?
They
Like,
so
I've
my
always
mom,
wondered, like, when you go no contact with people, do
yeah.
you warn them first, right? I'm sure it's case by case basis, but
I'd basically started for about a year, just setting boundaries and being really clear, like, hey, I'm not going to talk about this topic with you because we're not going to agree on it. And yeah, I'm only going to call like maybe once a month because I'm busy, and I don't have time to sit on the phone. Um, and like, yeah, I'm not going to spank my kid. I'm going to raise them the way that I think is best. Um, and it ended up, I ended up in a fight with my mom over something. Um, and she emailed me and said that she considered herself only the parent to 5 children now. That
Jesus
I was not
Christ.
her child anymore.
Okay. Well,
Um, and I just responded with like, okay, and just moved on.
wow.
And yeah, and I ended up, shortly after that, my grandmother emailed me and was like, how dare you, I'm old and I'm never going to see my great grandchild anymore.
Whose fault is that, ma'am?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm confused.
So I was like, I'm sorry you're hurt. This is where I'm at. You can support me or you can leave.
Yeah.
um and then a few weeks later, I actually decided to change my name, and posted my name change on my social media. And my aunt saw it and like just freaked the fuck out. And so that kind of cut her out of my life too.
Yeah. It's
Um,
amazing how the trash takes itself out so often.
it really does. And that's kind of just how it proceeded. Like just one by one family members would disagree with me, and I'd be like, "Okay, bye." And here I am, like completely no contact. But yeah, I didn't really give them a warning. I kind of just set boundaries, and then they decided they didn't like it
And
anymore.
they took
So
that personally.
they did, yes.
That's well, man, that's always wild is like when all you do is make a declaration of what's healthy for you and
Yep.
people just lose their minds. It's amazing the number of people that are like, that's reasonable, okay. And then the
Yeah.
number of people that are like, oh, yeah, it's
Totally.
crazy. Like, man,
Yeah.
they literally just like oil and water. You can just
Yep.
tell who's who so close.
Yep.
Do you think that that experience makes you a better like partner and parent, different partner and parent? What are
uh
your thoughts on your changes impacting how you are in
yeah.
relationships with people?
I feel like I'm such a better partner now. I'm no longer willing to like pretend that I'm okay with something, or like try to couch it in very careful words, because like, I'm a woman. And like once I was able to like really come out and be like, actually that's not who I am. Actually, I don't consider myself a woman, and I don't think that my gender identity should have any bearing on my contributions to a relationship. And now like I'm connecting more authentically. I have two absolutely wonderful partners who have been so supportive, and I don't think I would have gotten here if I was still in relationship with my family. I think that was major. And I feel like I'm such a better parent now, because I kind of hold my kid with an open hand and recognize that like I can do everything to the best of my ability, and she might still decide, or they might still decide when they get older, that like I did something that was really harmful. And I feel like now that I've walked through that, I'm much more prepared to say like, I am sorry that
Yeah.
thing impacted you that way. Can
Yeah.
I pay for your therapy? Like what steps do you need from me to be able to stay in relationship, because you're more important than me being right.
Right.
Um
Absolutely. That apology aspect is so huge. I
yeah,
feel like 90% of the issues that people have with the way they were raised and their parents and like the lifestyle they grew up in was just that the parent will not acknowledge it ever happened, or
totally.
will briefly acknowledge it happened and then turn it around on how it's not their fault and it's your fault or something like
Yep.
that. And I
Yep.
feel like millennials and Gen Z are really going to be different parents for the reason
Yeah.
that we've one, been to therapy, two, we're
Mhm.
open about it,
Yeah.
three, we just allow people to enjoy them, so like just have a good time.
Yeah.
But also we will always apologize,
Yes.
and we'll at least, maybe we won't get it perfect the first time because nobody
Yeah.
does, but like,
Totally.
I hear you, I see you, I'm so sorry that that was your experience. Mine was different than yours, but I'm acknowledging what you're telling me,
Yeah.
right? I tell people all the time, you can be wrong about facts, you can't be wrong about feelings, right? if
Yes.
if
Oh,
you say you hurt my feelings, I can't say no, I didn't.
right.
Right. I can say, I didn't realize that. I can say, I
Mhm.
view that situation differently, but I cannot tell you that I didn't hurt your feelings or scare
Right.
you or harm you emotionally in some way. And that's
Yeah.
like, I don't understand why that's like so hard for people to understand. And like, by when your kid comes to you and they say, I was really hurt by this,
Yeah.
the fact that they're coming to you and they're telling you about it and they're giving you the opportunity to hear about it, to me, like, one, I appreciate that they are coming to me and not like
Mhm.
keeping it secret and harboring it and making it worse for all of us, but
Totally.
like,
Yeah.
instead of taking it as like, how dare you attack me, it's like, thank you for coming to me about this, I'm glad we can keep this in
Yes.
here and like talk about it here, and
Yeah.
then decide if we need to take it to a counselor or something. It's just,
Right.
it's wild to me how
Yeah.
people take so much offense to their loved ones being like, "Do you mind if I have a mature communication with
Yeah.
you about something that I recognize you probably didn't experience the same way?" What? No.
Yeah.
Of course not.
Totally. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's really fascinating to me, because like my parents, particularly my mom, like I actually haven't really spoken to my dad. But my mom initially was like, I it's impossible for any parent to be perfect, but I did my best. And I'm like, I could say that exact same sentence and I
Mhm.
mean something so different with it.
Yes.
And it's like you're so close to the truth. You're so close to getting it right, and you're just not
Yeah.
quite there yet.
Yeah, and, like, also, when I did my best in math and I still got an F, that didn't seem to be good enough for you, even though you knew I was doing my
Right.
best, so
Totally. Yeah.
mm,
It's such a different standard.
yeah, that's awesome, though, and, like, you
Yeah.
seem like, one of the first things I noticed, right, is, like, I'm not even looking at your face, I'm only looking at you from here down, but, like, your shoulders are relaxed, your demeanor is relaxed, like, your voice is relaxed, like, everything the minute you logged on, I was like, "This is a relaxed individual living
Yep.
their best life," like, you just have this, like, glow, this, like, relaxed glow, and I don't understand why people don't want others to experience that, right?
Right.
Like, your
Right.
church leaders should be the people encouraging you to figure out how you're the happiest and how to maybe incorporate that into God as well. Like, maybe
Right.
God can tell you who you are. There are ways to, like, explore sides of yourself and still come back to God and come back to the church and maybe, like,
Totally.
talk to them about it. It's just
Yeah.
it's so interesting that, like, so many people, the more happiness they find and the more of themselves they find, the fewer people they have in their
Yeah.
circle there for them to, like, celebrate with them.
Totally.
It's just
Yeah.
insane. And so this new version of you, even though it's been you the whole time, like, this
Yeah.
publicly new version of you, is that causing, like, do you think that'll cause any issues in terms of, like, co-parenting? Does he still talk to his parents and your in-laws, your former in-laws?
Yeah, they're still really connected, really involved. We thankfully ironed out a lot of the differences for
Good.
co-parenting in particular.
That's good.
There's a couple still like really hard conflicts, but we kind of figured out where the middle ground was for the paperwork.
Yeah.
And have something to kind of fall back on if we do end up disagreeing.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think that a lot of who I am now is very hard for him to cope with.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't know. I hope that gets easier as time goes on, and I've heard that it does. But from my experience, kind of the one thing that we're still wholly in line with is we're not teaching our kid about religion until they're
Interesting.
yeah we've chosen to wait until their brain is a little bit more mature and can kind of
Yes.
work through logic and understand that like there's a lot of perspectives on the world,
Yeah.
and each of them has something different to offer.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that rubbed his parents the wrong way. Um, but we made it really clear that if they can't follow our guidelines, they don't get access to our kid.
That's so great that he backs you up on that as
Yeah.
well. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
that was such a relief to know that like
Yeah.
at least we were on the same page. And he's an atheist now. And
Interesting.
he's like told his family that he's an atheist, and they'll still try to get him in theological discussions and debates and stuff, and he's very much developed the ability to say no to that, which is
Good.
really
That's
healthy.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I
Awesome.
think I think that was the biggest worry that I had, and that at least has been pretty well managed.
Yeah. So, if you had something like a message or something you would want to say to somebody who maybe they're in the church, but they're not sure if they belong there, or maybe they're in the church and they're not sure where they stand sexually or with their gender identity, and they don't know if they belong there, if they should leave, what
Hmm.
would you say to somebody who might see themselves in your story?
First off, go to therapy.
Yes.
Therapy
Yeah,
is,
outside
and
of the
go to
church.
like yes, an actual therapist.
Yes.
And it's fine if like you want to gravitate towards a therapist who shares your belief system, but just understand that like the more separated that advice can be, the healthier it's going to be
Yeah.
for you.
If you wouldn't go to the church for your toothache, you probably shouldn't go to the church for your mental health.
Totally. And I think for me, like when I started out, it was a voice that was somewhat within the church and somewhat within my spiritual belief system, but it
Yeah.
was somebody who was outside of it just enough to be able to like say, to give me that freedom to leave if I wanted to. So having a trusted voice, having somebody who is separated enough from your church family, is just incredibly impactful.
Yes.
And the other thing I would say is, I mean, if you grew up like me, medication, especially mental health medication, is so demonized.
Yes.
And
It's unfortunate.
it really is. And I was scared of therapy for years because my parents used it as a threat when they would find out like I had serious mental health problems when I was in high school. And it ended up scaring me away from therapy for about
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah. I remember people saying, you don't need therapy, you need to pray more.
Yes, yeah.
And you're like, why can't I do both?
Right,
What if I
right.
pray and he tells me to go to therapy?
Yep,
Like,
yep. And so go to therapy, talk to your doctors, like have a doctor. That's another thing. I was terrified of doctors.
yep.
No, go to a doctor, talk to somebody about whatever your mental health problems might be, and understand that if you do get prescribed medication to help you manage your mental health, that is, it might take you a few tries to find the medication that works for you. But when you do, it is literally life changing.
So,
Um,
oh, yes,
I would not be able to be here talking to you without like hyperventilating and panicking if I
yes.
wasn't on a mood stabilizer.
Yes, yeah, I was prescribed Adderall for the first time when I turned 29. I took it and I went to the store afterward and like the world was just different. Like
Yep.
it's just I remember texting my brother and being like, "Is this how everyone's brains have just always been working? Like
Yeah.
I'm confused." Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And it might, like to anybody who's questioning, like it might feel like this is normal for you, but I promise your normal can be better. Your normal
Yes.
can feel
Yes.
more secure and more confident. And a lot of the times, if you can get there, if you can take care of your mental health, a lot of the other pieces fall into place.
Yes.
It'll
Yes.
it'll help with whatever kind of sexual orientation or gender identity questions you have. If you're not constantly in a state of distress, you're able to really go through that process and find
Yes.
yourself. um
100%.
and like that's totally a process. You might feel like your gender identity is one way one day and totally different the next
Yeah,
day, and just
absolutely.
exploring that and trying to find whatever makes you feel comfortable and confident. That can go anyway. If you decide that you're cishet, like if that's what makes you feel true to yourself, that's great. You do not
Yeah.
have to identify as queer to be able to find yourself outside of
Yeah,
organized religion.
absolutely. That's awesome. I absolutely love that. I love everything that you just said. I think your message is so important. And I just wanted to thank you, one, for sharing your story. I try to emphasize all the time with people who didn't grow up religious how difficult and brave and just hardcore it is to sit here and tell your story and to tell it honestly and to share your experience. There's just so many different things about it that are supposed to be like wrong, and so many people
Yeah.
and facets. Like there I've had guests cancel on me before at the last minute and people are like, "Oh, that's rude." I'm like, "No, you don't understand. Like you don't understand the mental gymnastics it takes to get on here and talk in the first place. The mental gymnastics it takes to fill out that form online.
Totally,
Like,
yeah.
even if they don't email me back, just filling out that form, I'm like, fuck yeah. Like,
Yep.
you did. Like, even if you change your mind, even if you reach out to me in 3.5 years, like, fuck
Yeah.
yeah, man. Um,
Totally. And
yeah,
also like I've been sharing my story very honestly for about 3 years now.
that's awesome.
And I would not be able to be here and be as open and honest if I hadn't practiced with my small circle first.
Yes, yes,
Take your time to like
yes.
find, even if it's just one trusted person to share your story with. take the time to do that. If they're a friend of yours, they're gonna appreciate it, and they'll probably reciprocate. There's probably a
Yeah.
lot that they haven't felt comfortable talking about.
Right. That's
Um,
the other aspect is if you feel a
yeah.
certain way, the likelihood that you know somebody else who secretly also feels that same way and just doesn't realize anybody else in the room agrees,
Yeah.
pretty high. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
once I actually shared like my coming out story and stuff, I had seriously dozens of my friends message me privately and be like, "Hey, I'm not ready to talk about this publicly, but thank you because I thought I
Yes.
was the only one."
Yes.
And it really is impactful even if you're just sharing with one person. You have
Yeah.
no idea how much of an impact that can have on yourself and have on your
100%.
friend.
100%. Well, Jerry, thank you so much for picking me as one of your platforms to share with. I really appreciate it, like more than you know. And for anybody listening, if this sounds like you, if this sounds like somebody you know, feel free to share this episode and just like do whatever you want, experience, explore, get mental health help. But I think like the most important part is like what you said, start that foundation with taking care of yourself and your mental health, and
Yeah.
then worry about sharing your story and things like
Yeah.
that. I think that's awesome. I think that's awesome. Thank you so much, Jerry. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much and thank you for doing this for other people like me. It's such a healing experience.